Hello and welcome to this introductory video on bias in critical appraisal. In this video, we will look at different types of bias which can occur in the literature. This is not an exhaustive list, but we will cover bias which can appear in all kinds of literature and others which are more specific to certain types of research. Here we have a definition from Cochrane Reviews, which describes bias as a systematic error or deviation from the truth in the results. This can lead to under or overestimation of the true intervention. The effect bias can have on a paper can be minor to much more major, and it can occur at any time during the study. It's important when appraising a paper to see that the researchers have done everything they can to eliminate bias, including acknowledging any limitations within the study. As discussed in our Introduction to Critical Appraisal video, you want the information in the paper to be valid and reliable. So what types of bias can occur in research papers? Let's start with funding bias. Funding bias involves looking at who is providing money to support the study. Information on the funding or sponsoring organisation should be included in the paper. Is the funding organisation involved in the intervention discussed? For example, are they the manufacturers of the drug being tested? Do you think the results have been skewed to please the funding organisation? Next, we have language bias, which relates to excluding information because it is written in a different language, most often because it is not written in English. This is a bias most often connected to systematic reviews. As part of a systematic review, you are attempting to find as much relevant information as possible, and by ignoring non-English papers, you might not be getting the full picture about the intervention you are investigating. Language bias can also relate to where the information is being published. For example, an article published in a smaller non-English language journal, which may not be available on certain databases. When appraising, have a close look at the population included in the study. Ideally, to reduce bias, the participants should be as similar as possible to each other in terms of common characteristics and should match the intended population to be studied. Selection bias may be hard to avoid, but wherever possible, the researchers should try to match the people within the groups as closely as they can and discuss within the paper where there may be differences. The selection of participants into the group should also be a random process. We will look further into selection bias in our video on appraising randomized control trials. Unfortunately, with any trial, it is likely there will be less participants at the end of the study than at the start. Consider how many people have been lost during the study, and does this affect making conclusions on the results? Why did they leave the study? This could be for various reasons, such as adverse effects, death, or something outside of the study completely. Who is still in the study, and do they still represent the target population? Essentially, you again need to see if the characteristics of those remaining in the study are different to those who left. Overall, what effects do you think these factors have had on the results? When reading the paper, check what procedures the researchers had in place to handle lost participants, and do they report follow-up communication with the groups? Performance bias can occur during a study if the researchers do not offer equal care between the groups, perhaps because of their knowledge of whether participants are receiving the intervention or not, or if the groups are exposed to something unrelated to the intervention. Detection bias is related to how outcomes are measured or assessed. A way to reduce both of these biases is through the use of blinding. For example, a double-blind study means that neither the researchers or the participants know who is receiving the intervention until the study is complete, therefore reducing the risk of influencing the results. Related to detection bias is observer bias, which relates to observations or recordings during a study and whether a researcher's views, prior knowledge, or expectations can influence the process. As with any bias, it is important that the researchers have procedures in place in order to reduce the chance of this bias occurring. This brings us to the end of our video introducing bias. We will look at bias in further detail in subsequent videos. You can also find further support for critical appraisal in our Moodle course on the Trust Moodle page, or contact your site library for one-to-one and department support.